Hello, everybody. Those of you that are joining us for our webinar today on how to put together an ideal CV, you're very welcome. Great to see so many people here, and obviously we can't see your faces, but yeah, so certainly great to see so many people joining us. My name is Stuart Moore. I'm a director at Plus One Recruitment. We're an Oxfordshire-based employment agency. And I am joined today by my colleague Daniel Marlowe, who I'm sure will introduce himself shortly. Dan will be manning the chat today. So whilst you're not able to ask questions in the meeting, feel free to pop any questions in the chat, and Dan will try and get back to you throughout the duration of the meeting. Now, this meeting is being recorded, so everyone that's attended today will get access to the recording afterwards. So if you miss any parts, don't worry, you'll get a recording at the end. If you'd rather keep your cameras off and be anonymous, then that's entirely up to yourself. Cameras are enabled at your discretion. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Dan Marlowe. I am the recruitment team manager here for Plus One. So what I will normally do in these webinars is that I will man the chat. So if we have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A section. We'll try and answer as many as we possibly can today, but equally if things need to be taken offline, or we'll get back to you after the webinar if we don't have time today. But I hope you all take something away from the webinar today. We've got some great content to go through with you. And yeah, we would always welcome anyone's feedback at the end of the webinar. But thank you for joining us. And yeah, I'll hand you back over to Stuart.
Cheers, Dan. Yeah, as Dan says, one thing we do look for is your feedback. Helps us put relevant content together for our webinars. So at the end of this, or sometime this afternoon, we'll send you a really short survey. It'll take you all of about a minute to complete. And then off the back of that, we'll send you the video link as well as a cheat sheet, which again is full of hints and tips on how to put together your CV. So as you can see on the slide, we're going to be putting together a CV masterclass today, where hopefully we'll be talking to you about how you can get your CV in the best possible shape to show yourself off when you're applying for jobs. So this is what we're going to be talking about in our webinar. The webinar will last for approximately 30 minutes, so we've got quite a bit of content to pack in. If we do have time for Q&A at the end, we may well open up the floor. But as you can see, we're going to be talking about what should be in your CV, but also talking a little bit about your LinkedIn profile, if you have one. Certainly, if you don't have one at the moment, we'll be talking about what should be included in your LinkedIn profile and why it's important. So without any further ado, let's talk a little bit about what should be in a CV. Now, this slide is really highlighting what employers are looking for from a CV. Some of it's fairly obvious, like work experience and work history. But really, when anyone is reviewing your CV, they want to be looking for not just your work experience, but to try and gauge a little bit about who you might be as a person, where you've come from, and I suppose you'd call it your employment history or your employment story. I always like to think of CVs as a story. It's somebody's career story so far. And if you can show a clear trajectory on your CV from the point you left school, perhaps, or higher education, through to where you are now, then you're probably about 90% there. But I've included a line at the bottom there about your CV should pass the 7-second rule. Now, some of you might have heard this before. Obviously, we look at CVs all the time, a big part of what a recruiter does, of course. But there is a statistic which I would agree is pretty true, in that most of the time your CV will get around about 7 seconds of attention before a viewer will decide whether you're relevant to put through to either a pre-screening call or an interview. So that's 7 seconds from the moment that they look at the first page on your CV. That's your first impression window. So if your CV passes that, you've got a pretty good chance of getting a call back, or at least getting shortlisted. And we'll come on to that a little bit later throughout this presentation. So something we often get asked is, how long should my CV be? You will hear all sorts of conflicting answers to that question. I'm sure you have over the years. Anything from shouldn't be more than 1 page through to 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages, as many pages as you want. The ideal, if you asked most employers, is between 2 and 3 pages maximum. Okay, so for most people, 1 page isn't enough. I would suggest, unless you've just left school or university, you've probably got a little bit more content on there than you'd be able to possibly fit on 1 page. So don't worry if your CV goes on to 2 pages or even 3. The most important thing, and this goes back to what I mentioned just now about the 7-second rule, is that the viewer or the reader can see what they want to see within that first 7 seconds, which is likely to be on page 1. If they can't, they're not going to go to page 2. So if it's 3 pages, it's irrelevant. It needs to grab their attention from the first page. And certainly if it does that, then there will be a good reason that they will then want to turn to page 2 or page 3. But I would suggest that 3 pages is about enough. If you can get it on 2, fine, but also bear in mind that you don't want to be chopping out potentially important content. And we'll go through that in a little bit more detail shortly in terms of what the content should look like. Okay, so a bit about the different sections on a CV. These are sections that really everyone's CV should contain. The first is the introduction or the profile. So this is really the kind of top paragraph, probably just underneath your name, where you've got 4 or 5 lines, so really no more than a paragraph, to talk a little bit about who you are and what you're good at. So it might be something fairly straightforward, like, I am a ACCA chartered accountant and I've got 20 years experience in practice, and I'm looking for XYZ next step in my career, for example. It might be something like, I'm a sales executive or a sales manager and I've got 5 years experience in tech, working in the tech sector, and I'm looking to improve, blah, 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 blah. Whatever it is, it needs to be really obvious from the first line what you are and what you do, and almost, what kind of box or pigeonhole you belong to, if that makes sense. It's far easier then for somebody who's perhaps a middleman, and that could be a recruiter, it could be someone from HR, who's initially screening your CV, to immediately recognize, yep, that's the sort of person we want for that job. They've done it already, they've got relevant experience, or if they haven't done it already, there's an explanation that they're looking to do that in the future, and this is why they've applied. Little bit of something I've mentioned here, just underneath where I've put career goals. Try and avoid, wherever possible, and it's not just for this part, but other parts of the CV, just try and avoid some cliches. We often see things like, I don't know, I work well in a team, I work well on my own, that kind of thing. You may do, but it's a little vanilla and everybody puts it. So perhaps try and be a little bit more original when you're writing this. It's one of the parts of your CV where you get to add a little bit of color, specifically about you, before you get into the kind of more factual stuff. So just yeah, maybe kind of think about avoiding cliches wherever you can in this section. So then we've got employment experience, of course. Now, really, the ideal for this would be in chronological order, of course, but with your most recent job at the top. Sometimes we see CVs where it's back to front, and you're starting off in 1985, and you've got to scroll right to the bottom of page 6 to find the current job. Not particularly user-friendly way of sending out your CV. So put the most current job at the top of your work experience. So it should say something like 2021 to present, for example. Then, of course, a little bit about the business often helps. A lot of people go straight into the bullet points or the information about the job. It's often quite nice just to put a line or two about the company that you work for. So it could be that you work for a contract catering company and you say, you know, XYZ business is a contract catering business. We provide services and products for schools and education facilities around the country. My role as operations supervisor is, and then you go straight into the key duties and responsibilities. Again, talking about CV length, probably no more than 6 to 10 bullet points to really succinctly break down your responsibilities and duties. Now, word of caution on this, and we see this a lot, of course, because we literally look at hundreds of CVs every day. Please don't copy and paste your job description. We do see it straight away. Often job descriptions are written in the third person as well, which when you're reading a CV kind of sounds a bit weird. And they can be very repetitive, and it can say things like responsible for da 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 da, responsible for da 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 da. It almost becomes like a, I don't know, some sort of strange hit list. So yeah, try and make sure it's all in your own words. Again, an opportunity to add a little bit of your own character and your own originality. And maybe you don't need to add things like, you know, those catch-alls like any other ad hoc tasks that my boss asked me to do. I think most people expect in any job there will always be little bits that you have to do outside of the job spec. So yeah, really try and make that 6 to 10 bullet points quite concise and to the point, adding enough detail, but also yeah, just making sure it's relevant. Another thing I've added on here is, well, that we don't often see, but always stands out. Okay, so this is a good thing to add to your CV if you've not got it already. 1 or 2 key achievements for any of the positions you've done. So again, if it's a sales job, fantastic. You know, it could be that you hit 110% of your sales target last year. If you didn't hit target and that's why you're on the job market, maybe think of something else. Perhaps think of a couple of examples of customers that gave you good reviews or testimonials, or maybe there's another metric you're measured by. If you're not in a sales role, if you're in a customer facing role, then again, it could be a positive review, or it could be maybe that you've won an internal award. So perhaps the company does, you know, an annual internal awards or employee recognition scheme and you won something. Just anything you can think of there that again adds a little bit more color to the CV and will immediately draw the eye beyond, you know, what you're just doing day to day, if that makes sense. So I've got some examples here. Now this is me. I'm not doing this to showboat or anything like that. I'm just giving you an example of perhaps what I would write if I was writing a CV about me. So as you can see, a little bit of an explanation about what +1 recruitment is, because, you know, many people wouldn't have heard of us before. Again, a bit of an introduction as to what I do. So I'm responsible for the direction and the running of the business, blah, blah, blah. And then what have I got on there? 5 bullet points with my main responsibilities as the business owner and director. So I've tried to cover off most of the kind of main facets of my job as succinctly as possible without being too brief. As you can see, if that was on a piece of paper, all of that content would probably take up no more than about half a side of A4. Okay, and then to add to that, there's a few key achievements here, which again would be just underneath those previous bullet points. So you'd have this page or this part page, and then there's a few examples below. Now, to some people, they might not sound fantastic. To other people, and sorry, just to recap on that, to me, they might not sound that fantastic because I'm sure when you're writing your CV, a lot of people do have difficulty singing about themselves in terms of, you know, I don't feel comfortable talking about myself, or I don't think I've done anything noteworthy. Just because it's not necessarily noteworthy to you doesn't mean that someone else wouldn't be impressed by it. And at the very least, these become talking points during the interview. So as long as they're true, of course, do expect to have an interviewer maybe say, well, okay, talk to me a little bit about some of the people you've coached or developed that have then gone on to big careers in your industry, for example. If it's not on there, they can't talk about it. Okay, so that's your main work experience content. Education. Now, sometimes we get CVs where the whole of the education section is completely missing. Now, obviously, well, or not obviously, businesses are not meant to discriminate against people for age. And I know there is sometimes a reluctance for people to put dates, particularly education dates, on their CV through fear that they might say, well, okay, I went to school in the early 1970s and I'm therefore concerned that they may immediately think, well, because I'm over 50, perhaps I'm going to be somehow, not pulled through for interview, or maybe I might miss out on the opportunity. I get it. I completely get that. I do understand that's a real fear, and unfortunately, it does go on. Not with us, I might add, but it does happen, unfortunately, sometimes. What I would suggest is putting the education details anyway, but just leave the dates off if you're concerned about that. So you could still mention, the school you went to, or the university or the college. Certainly list your qualifications, absolutely, and any training courses as well that you've done, even if it feels, I don't know, maybe less important, like a food safety course or a manual handling course or a health and safety refresher. It's often potentially relevant, and again, it adds more kudos and more color to your CV. So certainly put everything on here. And the other point I put on here as well is just add a line or two just about some of the IT skills that you've got. Certainly if it's a professional services role or an office-based role, it's good for employers to know, that you're proficient on Microsoft Office. It might be that you're not proficient on all of the Office products, so you might not be an advanced Excel user. But if you've used Excel to a reasonable standard, put it on there. If you're comfortable with Word, if you're comfortable with Outlook, and if you've used Microsoft Teams and Zoom and you're familiar with this, then definitely put it on there. Likewise too, if you're a creative and you've used different packages such as Adobe, Photoshop or Illustrator or any one of the other graphics packages, definitely put it on your CV. You never know sometimes when a client or an employer is looking at a CV, and sometimes they don't necessarily realize they're looking for something until they see it. So it's a little bit like when you go to Tesco's and you take your shopping list with you. And I expect everybody does this. You go with the plan to just buy what's on the shopping list. You come away with about 20 extra items that you didn't expect to have, but you decided you wanted when you see it. This is exactly the same psychology. If you've got Photoshop on your CV, or you've used Canva or some other products, an employer might go, actually, that would be pretty useful because our marketing team currently outsource our graphics work. So if we could bring in an admin person who also knows how to use Photoshop, bonus. And you might just get an interview just for putting that on your CV. So worth putting on there. Okay, a little bit of general info. Please, you'd be amazed how many people don't do this. Please put your contact information on your CV. Again, amazing how many people don't put their phone number on their CV. So CV looks great, can't get hold of you. So we have to scour the internet looking for your email address or find you on LinkedIn and send you a message. Your CV, you need to make it easy for people to contact you. You want people to contact you about job opportunities. Please put your contact details on your CV. You don't have to put your address. Good if you put your location. So if you live in Oxford, just put Oxford. Gives them a bit of an idea as to whether it would potentially be a realistic commute. If the job is in Reading and you live in Oxford, expect one of the questions is, do you know the job is in Reading? How are you going to get here 3 days a week, or whatever the working pattern is? And something else which not everybody puts on their CV. Again, I know some people do struggle to come up with ideas for this. Hobbies and interests. I like seeing hobbies and interests on a CV. I think it tells, again, a little bit about you. It doesn't have to be War and Peace, just a couple of lines that says, this is what I enjoy doing when I'm not at work. This is the kind of thing I'm into. Yeah, just again, a little bit more about you as a human being. And again, it might be that if you happen to support Chelsea Football Club, and I know some people do, unfortunately. No, joking. Your future boss might also be a Chelsea fan, and again, it's a potential bonding conversation over a Teams call or in an interview. So again, worth putting on there because you just never know. If you struggle to think of something, so you know, not everyone has a hobby that they think is worth putting on, then simple activities like, you know, I enjoy going to the gym, I enjoy eating healthily, I like cooking, I like reading, particular novels I like reading are crime thrillers or, you know, biographies. Anything, again, that just makes you stand out as an individual is great to have on here. Okay, so I'm sure everyone can think of something about them, or maybe ask a friend or a loved one, you know, what do you think I'm into? And I'm sure they'll give you lots of ideas. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so aside from the CV itself, what else is important? Well, LinkedIn, we've mentioned just briefly at the beginning. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, and I do understand that for many people, LinkedIn is not a high priority platform. Certainly in recruitment, we're on it all the time. It's like our second life. But yeah, it might not be something that you use day to day like any other platform. It's free to set a profile up. You can set one up within minutes, and really it's a good idea to do it, quite frankly, because so many employers advertise on LinkedIn that you are potentially missing out on a huge number of job opportunities if you're not present on LinkedIn. And secondly, certainly we do this, most recruiters do this. And again, thinking about how many job vacancies are managed by recruiters, we are your audience, okay? So if your LinkedIn profile is 10 years out of date and it doesn't have a recent photo on it, so please try not to catfish people if you can. Or it's just, yeah, if it needs some work, then it's well worth spending 5 or 10 minutes updating it, because that will quite honestly be one of the first places that a prospective employer and certainly a recruiter will have a look at when they receive your CV and see how the information compares from your CV to your LinkedIn profile. Other social platforms, Facebook, Instagram, I suppose more personal platforms. I think, again, most people do this, but make sure you lock it down. And I would say, don't put anything on your Facebook profile or Instagram that you wouldn't want your mother to see. Okay. Again, it's all about first impressions. If there's a picture of you on a wild boozy night out, getting absolutely trolleyed and collapsing on the Leeds city centre in a booze coma, maybe take that off your LinkedIn profile, your Facebook page if you're applying for jobs. Just saying. Okay, so LinkedIn. Little bit of a stat, over 1 billion global users as of the end of last year, so a huge platform. And if you think about the economic age range of people in the world, they've probably got about a quarter of the world's working population on that platform. So it is phenomenally huge. As I've said already, it's often one of the first places we have a look at just to see, does the CV match the profile? And I've already mentioned this, but yeah, do make sure your profile shares most of your CV content. So when you're adding job content to your your LinkedIn profile, you don't need to copy and paste it verbatim, but just certainly take an abridged version of what's on your CV, and literally you can copy and paste that into your LinkedIn profile, certainly for your last few job roles, certainly for your education, and certainly for any qualifications that you've got. Professional qualifications are very important. Please choose a relevant background banner image. So that's the little strip at the top. When I say relevant, ideally find something that's relevant to your career choice. So if you're a chef, maybe have a picture of food or even a photo of something that you've made. Even better, really personalize it. If you work in sales, you could have a sort of sales oriented picture. If you're marketing, then something to do with marketing, etc., etc. The profile photo should be reasonably recent, bearing in mind that quite often nowadays, the first interaction an employer will have with you is possibly a video call. I joked about catfishing earlier. This kind of works in the same way. So again, it's worth taking a good recent photograph of yourself and using that as your LinkedIn profile. Try and stick to a headshot if you can, and try and make it, try and make it look professional. Again, this is a first impression from a looks point of view that someone will have of you when they look at your LinkedIn profile. And that reminds me, actually, if you are wanting to put a photograph of yourself on your CV, perhaps use the same one that you've used for your LinkedIn profile. So again, the information correlates between the two documents. So I've got an example of mine here. Again, this is not to showboat. This is just to show you the sort of layout and the sort of content you'd put on your profile. So again, a relevant background image, fairly recent picture of me. I think that was 2-3 years ago. So more or less still look like that. And underneath my underneath my name, you'll see I very clearly set out what I am and what I do. So you've got managing director, +1 recruitment, and I'm a recruitment agency specialist. So anyone looking at this will know immediately that's what Stuart is. He's a recruiter. Okay, it's that obvious. So think of it in that way. You know, if you were writing an advert about yourself along the lines of WeBuyAnyCar.com, you need to make it that obvious as to what you do. So maybe 2 or 3 words that sum you up. So again, going back to what I was saying about an accountant, it could be accountant, ACCA qualified, specialize in audit and taxation. Simple. And again, apply that rule to whichever profession you're in. If you're just leaving university and you haven't got a set profession, then it could be engineering graduates, specializing in whatever your dissertation was or whatever you want to specialize in. And it could just be something simple like available for work. And you can also set the open to work option up on your LinkedIn profile to show the world and to show recruiters that you are open to work. And it's like a little green overlay that appears on your face. It's like shooting a flare up into the sky and every recruiter will suddenly start bombarding you with messages. Not all relevant, of course, but I suppose you'd rather be getting the messages than not at all. So definitely worth spending a moment doing that. Okay, and just some finishing touches. We've only got a minute or 2 left. Spelling and grammar. Again, I saw one only this morning. I had a Teams meeting with a potential candidate. Her CV was full of spelling mistakes. And it's just the first thing that stands out. It's so basic. But please just make sure you spell check and grammar check your CV. If you're using Word, just run the spell check. If you don't have access to Word, then just get a relative or friend to read it through. Someone you know is good at English and is quite good at proofreading. Yeah, if it's full of typos, then, you know, don't be surprised if you don't get a call back. Check your dates for accuracy. So if you left a job in, I don't know, last summer, and you've put on your CV that your employment is to present, then, okay, you're going to get a bit of scrutiny about what you've done for the last 3 or 4 months. Likewise, don't lie on your CV, okay? Everybody has had jobs that at some point maybe didn't work out. And perhaps you were in that job for just a few months. And for whatever reason, you're worried about it standing out on your CV. Just be honest. You know, if a job didn't work out, it didn't work out. But you may have other jobs where you had good long stints on your CV. A good recruiter will find out. And certainly if a business takes references and the dates don't match, that could potentially be a red flag, which may, in worst case scenarios, result in a job offer being rescinded. So yeah, just please bear that in mind. And that's it really. Make sure you stick to a standard black and white CV. Make sure you use a clear font like Calibri or Arial, so it's easy to read. And stick to a fairly plain content rather than anything too designy. If you are a graphic designer, then you can always include a PDF highlights of your portfolio as well as your CV. So that's it. 30 minutes goes remarkably quickly. I hope you all got something out of that. If you didn't get a chance to ask any questions in the chat, or you didn't get your question answered, we will try and mop up a little bit in the next few minutes. We will be sending out the survey later this afternoon to get your thoughts on the content, and we will be running further webinars on a regular basis throughout the year. So please keep an eye on our websites and our social pages for more information. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.